Happy New Year to you. It's a privilege as always to serve under your chairship, and I beg to move that this House has considered free bus pass travel for the over 60s. I want to start by thanking the petitioner, Mrs Karen Hickman, and the 101,000 people who signed the petition for securing this debate on extending free bus travel for all over 60s across England. And I also want to thank my 211 constituents in Folkestone Hythe and Romney Marsh who signed it. I also want to thank Transport for London, Age UK London, Independent Age and the Local Government Association, who are incredibly helpful in my preparation for this debate, which I lead for the Petitions Committee. There are many areas of our country where there is free bus travel for the over 60s. London, Liverpool, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Bus services are a critical form of public transport. They are a public good which get people to work, allow them to visit friends and family, travel to health appointments and participate in social activities. Bus services support active lifestyles, reduce social isolation, reduce car use and lower air pollution and make our environment cleaner and safer. It was a pleasure meeting with Mrs Hickman. She was particularly frustrated by the regional differences we have in this country when it comes to bus services. Mrs Hickman would like to see greater investment in rural bus services in her area of Lincolnshire. Mr Mundell, there's a growing misperception in our country that if you are over 60 or somehow financially blessed with a house where the mortgage has been paid off and you have plenty of assets and capital washing around. Many people think that the over 60s don't need free bus travel. I would challenge that narrative, as does Mrs Hickman. Based on household below average income data, there are 875,000 people aged 60 to 64 living in poverty. A new report from Standard Life has identified a substantial rise in financial insecurity among people in their early 60s after the state pension age has increased since 2010. And their report highlights that there are 250,000 more people aged 60 to 64 in relative income poverty than in 2010. And carer prevalence is greatest in the UK amongst adults in their 50s and early 60s. This age group is twice as likely to be carers as a younger adult group. And due to the rising pension age, many people in their 60s are seeking work. The high levels of redundancy among this age group during the pandemic is one factor that led to increased unemployment among the 60 to 64 age group. Many people in this group are key workers. Health and social care, which is a sector that's growing in my constituency, are among those with the highest proportion of older workers, along with retail. And over 60s with a disability or long-term health condition are more likely to face financial hardship. Now, there's already free bus travel for the over 60s in several parts of the UK, so this policy can work. In London, there's a 60-plus London Oyster photocard available to London residents over 60, which is operated and funded by TfL. In London, there are 383,000 active users of that photocard, which I know is making a positive difference to the lives of the 24% of Londoners in that age group that live in poverty. In the Liverpool city region, residents are eligible for free travel from age 60 on buses, trains and ferries, which is funded by the transport levy that the Merseyside local authorities pay. Looking at another younger age group for the moment in Liverpool, I want to commend the combined authority for the recent introduction of a care leaver travel pass, giving free local travel on buses, trains and ferries for young adults leaving the care system, which is a commercially funded offer. Now, what most or all of these schemes have in common is that they were all implemented as a result of local powers being used by local people for the benefit of local people. Isn't that how, Mr Mundell, our local communities should be run? In my view, surely it is. It's local people who know what their local needs are. Now, I understand Mrs Hickman's frustrations at the regional differences that can happen where some local areas have powers that others do not. But thanks to law changes by this Labour government, all English local transport authorities now have the power to set routes and fares because of the Bus Services Act 2025. And in my view, it's right that each local authority now grasps the nettle and gets on with delivering the high standard of bus services that the public are entitled to. I completely understand. I will.
Thank you. Thank you, my honourable friend, for giving way. And the issue that we face in Torbay is that we've seen a significant shrinkage in the number of commercial routes that have been available for whether they're bus pass users or bus users. Would my honourable friend agree with me that what we need to see is that sustained investment in bus services to drive a better services for all of our communities?
Thank the Honourable Member for his intervention, and I completely agree with what he says. Central government has to support local government in properly funding bus services, which is exactly as I will come on to say this government has been doing. But the critical question will be, are those local authorities going to spend the money in the way that is going to benefit passengers? Now, coming back to Mrs Hickman's view that there should be a centrally administered policy which would essentially make this a nationwide thing. Now, making this policy nationwide would cost central government an additional roughly 250 to 400 million a year, according to the Local Government Association. And that would likely trigger collapses without that money of evening and weekend services. If we lose more bus routes, this will be damaging for the over 60s who are working and rely on a bus to get to work. And as the Local Government Association also suggests, many councils argue that £1 fares for apprentices and students offers a higher economic multiplier than free travel for the over 60s. This is especially important when we're desperately trying to raise our economy's growth rate and reduce unemployment. And there's also a very strong argument for focusing more on getting apprentices and students to use buses, as this cohort of young people will develop the habit of getting on a bus, helping to secure a more stable long-term revenue stream for bus operators. Actually, as I just said, what we need is ample central government funding to local authorities so they can decide how best to run the bus network. The government is backing our bus network with £3 billion multi-year bus funding settlements for 25 to 29, helping create more certainty, stability and predictability for our bus system. The aim with this funding settlement is to deliver lower fares, more frequent and reliable bus services, and the national single bus fare cap was extended to run until March 27. Now, as I said, the Government's Bus Services Act empowers local authorities to take greater control of bus services, making them more reliable, accessible and affordable by enabling franchises, lifting bans on municipal bus companies and mandating zero-emission buses. Now, rightly in this debate, we're talking about the 60s, but it was the 80s when it all started to go wrong for our bus network with the reckless privatisation of our bus network under the 1985 Transport Act. The Bus Services Act is about a completely different approach by allowing local government to create locally and publicly operated owned bus services. I know that local authorities across the country have received significant funding boosts so they can improve local bus services. For example, in the Petitioners' Council, reform-run Lincolnshire County Council, they received a funding boost of £11.8 million to support better bus services. And in my area of Kent, reform-run Kent County Council received a funding boost this year of £42 million to spend on better bus services. So this government is not being partisan with funding decisions. Reform-run councils are receiving cash boosts to improve bus services from now until 2029, and the public should expect reform to deliver in places like Kent and Lincolnshire. And we must hold them to account in ensuring that they do spend the money, not on political advisers or mad adventures such as the Elon Musk-inspired Doge 2.0 cuts programme, but on making bus services work more accessibly, reliably and affordably. In December, I ran a bus survey to hear from my constituents about how they would like to see the £42 million of extra bus funding spent. And many of my constituents told me that bus services are not frequent enough, they are often unreliable, with too many late and even cancelled services, and many highlighted the issue of affordability. And what they want is for reform-run Kent County Council to spend that £42 million of extra funding on protecting existing routes from private sector cuts, more frequent bus services, cheaper fares, improved evening and Sunday services, and better bus links to schools, colleges and hospitals. I had one constituent suggesting extending free bus travel to the over 60s, but many of my constituents talked about wanting routes that had been cut under the failed experiment of privatisation to be reinstated. They asked for changes such as frequent direct bus services from Folkestone and the William Harvey Hospital, more evening and weekend bus services across Kent, and bringing back bus routes such as the number 73, the 77, the 78 and the 111 services in Folkestone Hythe and Romley Marsh.
Honourable Frank, if we're
yes.
point. I thank my honourable friend for giving way on that point. Before I was elected, I ran mental health services, including for older adults, and I understand because of that the importance of older people who need to access services doing that in a way which means they don't lose their appointment. We also know in Bournemouth that we have 47,226 over 60s, and many of the decisions about bus routes have not been taken with their views in mind, particularly in Throop, where I'm trying to reinstate a bus service, but also across Southbourne and Tupton. It sounds like he might agree, but would he agree that we should be using our new bus legislation to make sure that those communities that have been disenfranchised, that have been left behind, that have been left out, are being considered by local councils when they're deciding on routes?
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and the situation he describes is symptomatic of what I call the begging bowl approach of trying to reinstate routes, where a private company decides how they're going to run the service, they cut the routes that are more difficult to make money on, but which people really need. And we all go with our begging bowl, banging on their door, asking them to sort it out for our local constituents. But actually, the way that the government's legislation should be used by all local councils, now they have the money, is to actually listen to what local people want and provide the services that allow our communities to be joined up. And what he describes is exactly, Mr Mundell, what I have experienced in my constituency, and is exactly why these changes are desperately needed. Yes.
I'm really grateful for the speech that my honourable friend is making, and I thank the 237 people who signed the petition from my constituency. And I think at the root of this debate is look at the issue around inequality. And certainly there are many forms of inequality we can see around bus use. And clearly it's drawing attention to the geographical inequality. But beyond that, we also see the inequality, socio-economic inequality, and particularly looking at putting those resources around older people being able to access bus services instead of paying a £6 for a return journey, being able to access things like health appointments on time for that age group. Isn't it worth looking at those people living in deprivation and putting that money to support people to use buses from those communities?
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. This is exactly the reason why the government has put this legislation through Parliament, to allow local authorities to be held account for the decisions that they make in how they fund bus services. I completely agree that bus services are a fundamental public good and a public service, and in my constituency it's absolutely essential to allow people living in rural areas, often in rural poverty, reach GP surgeries or hospital appointments many, many miles away. And it's not as if they can walk or, rely on somebody to give them a lift. That often isn't there. And so having a bus service that is reliable and affordable is often the difference between sitting for days in pain or sitting in a situation where they're entirely cut off from the towns and the shops and the chemists and all the things that are needed to make life work. And so I completely agree with my honourable friend on that. But one survey response that I had that did stand out for a negative reason was this. They said, "I doubt reform will take much notice, frankly." And I totally understand that hard cynicism about reform, given their bewildering incompetence in Kent. And I implore reform to spend that money wisely. I will take my bus survey responses and put them directly to the council, because we have to see accountability and competence in the way our public services are delivered in Kent. So while in closing I'm sympathetic to the arguments for extending free bus travel to all over 60s across England, I believe that our policy focus should be on encouraging and supporting more local authorities to set up municipal bus companies so we can reverse bus privatisation, which has, like rail and water in my view, been a failure and has meant that all too often the interests of the private company and the shareholder have been put above those of the passenger.
Hear, hear. Now,
before closing, I have a couple of questions for the Minister. First of all, what further action beyond what I've talked about in my speech is the government taking to make bus travel more accessible and affordable for the over 60s? What is the government doing to make rural bus services more accessible and reliable, especially for that age group? What measures will the government put in place to hold councils such as reform-run Kent County Council and Lincolnshire County Council to account to ensure that they spend their additional bus funding prudently and purposefully? And how does the government plan to use investment in our bus network to help increase economic growth and lower unemployment? And can the Minister explain how empowering local government can lead to improved bus services? All the answers to all of these questions would be gratefully received, because it is an area that I'm constantly pressed about by my constituents, because we're a long constituency, we're coastal, it's very easy, very difficult to get around unless you have reliable public transport, and really that is what we have to achieve over the coming years with this funding and with the new powers that Kent County Council has. Thank you, Ms Mundell.
I remind members that they should bob if they wish to be called in the debate. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 702845 relating to free bus travel for people over 60. And before I call Iqbal Mohammed to speak, I just want to clarify with you, Mr Darling, if you wish to speak in the debate. You don't. Okay, I therefore call Iqbal Mohammed.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, and I congratulate my honourable friend for introducing this important debate. I want to begin by welcoming the debate and by making it clear that I strongly support the e-petition 702845. The fact that more than 100,000 people have signed this petition shows just how strongly the public feels about this issue and how it excuse me, and how far it reaches into people's everyday lives. The petition is simple and reasonable. It calls on the government to extend free bus travel to people over 60 in England, outside London, bringing England into line with Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. At present, those living outside London must wait until state pension age, currently 66, to qualify, despite the fact that mobility, confidence in driving and independence often decline well before that point. The government's response recognises the value of bus services and points to welcome investment, including the funding announced in the recent budget. I welcome that funding, but the response ultimately sidesteps the core issue. Responsibility is shifted to local authorities and devolved governments, rather than making this a statutory entitlement across England. That matters because leaving this as a discretionary measure creates inequality and uncertainty. Local authorities are under immense financial pressure, and people's access to free travel should not depend on whether they live, on where they live or how stretched their council budget happens to be. National problems require national solutions. We also need to be honest about the scale of the gap people face. This is not a short transition period. The difference between age 60 and state pension age is 6 years, and it is set to increase further as pension age rises. This is 6 more years during which people may be driving less, losing confidence behind the wheel, or giving up their car altogether, but are still expected to pay rising transport costs. For many older people, particularly in towns and areas with patchy public transport, the alternative is often taxis. That becomes harder in later life and retirement, when people are more likely to be living on a fixed income, watching every pound and trying to stretch their pension as far as possible. What was once an occasional expense can quickly become unaffordable. This debate is not just about transport policy. It is about mental health, dignity and independence. I have spoken many times, both in this chamber and in Westminster Hall, in the main chamber, about adult mental health and the importance of prevention. One of the clearest contributors to declining mental health in later life is loss of freedom of movement. Research by the London School of Economics shows that this policy delivered a policy of free transport for over 60s would deliver powerful and measurable benefits. Older bus pass holders are 37% less likely to be sedentary, improving physical health through everyday activity like walking to and from shops. They are also 1/3 less likely to experience social isolation, a factor strongly linked to poor mental and physical well-being. The NHS itself increasingly recognises the importance of community mental health for all older people, of staying socially connected, active and engaged. When people cannot get out to see friends, attend community groups, volunteer, or even make simple everyday journeys, isolation sets in. Loneliness, anxiety and depression are not abstract risks. They are real outcomes of restricted mobility. Free bus travel for over 60s is therefore not just a concession. It is an investment in well-being, independence and prevention. It supports healthier ageing. I will give way.
I do thank him for giving way, and I do apologise for interrupting his flow. I don't think anybody disagrees with him. Everybody would love free bus travel for people over 60, and perhaps even more people, but it's a question of cost. How much does he estimate this would cost? Because he talks about investment.
I thank my honourable friend for his investment. I'm afraid I don't have cost figures to hand, but the research that was referenced in preparation for this speech demonstrates the quantifiable economic benefits of this policy. So I believe any cost to implement such a policy would pay for itself many times over through reduced visits to the GP, to hospitals, and increased economic spend by people who are able to get out more. So just to continue, free bus travel would also supports healthier ageing, reduces isolation, and helps people remain part of their communities for longer, easing pressure on health and social care services in the long term. I urge the government to listen to the strength of feeling behind this petition, to move beyond passing responsibility elsewhere, and to consider making free bus travel for over 60s a fair, national and statutory entitlement. If we are serious about equality, prevention and supporting people through later life, this is a change we should be willing to make. Providing free bus travel for over 60s is a proven, practical and popular policy. The evidence is clear, the public support is strong, the need is urgent, and the government must act.
Mohammed Yazin.
Thank you. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, Mr. Mundell, and I thank the 148 constituents in Bedford and Kempston who signed the petition in support of the introduction of free concessionary travel for people over 60 across England. This is an important issue for older residents, many of whom rely on public transport to maintain their independence and participate fully in their communities. Local authorities, including Bedford Borough Council, are facing unprecedented financial pressures, with some councils approaching bankruptcy. This means that despite the clear benefits of concessionary travel, many councils simply do not have the funds to provide support at local level. Without central government intervention, older people risk being left without affordable transport options. Free bus travel for over 60s would not only provide much needed financial relief, but also help reduce social isolation, support access to healthcare, and enable continued engagement in work, volunteering, and community life. It is a small investment that delivers significant social value and improves quality of life for thousands of older residents. I urge the government to back this proposal and ensure that older people across England can access free and reliable transport, regardless of the financial situation of their local councils, to ensure bus users in England have the same provision as in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Call Polly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Blundell, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. The Freedom Pass in London is a model which is the envy of older residents across England. It has become embedded in the expectations of many that free public transport is one of the benefits of living in our capital city. But free travel for older residents is not the only element of a successful transport policy. Regular, reliable routes, safety on and off the bus, and non-polluting vehicles all add up to a successful public transport network. Now, all of the characteristics of a proper bus service are more possible now than they have been for years, as a result of the investment put by this government and the Better Buses Act that gives transport authorities the powers to make bus services more affordable, more reliable and safer. Kent County Council, which provides the buses or commissions the buses in my part of the world, in East Thanet, has 7.5 million fewer bus miles now than in 2010. That is 7.5 million fewer opportunities for people to get to work, get to healthcare appointments, or simply go out and have fun. Now, Mr Mundell and colleagues, that reduction doesn't happen by magic. It happens as a result of choices. Choices made by the party opposite, who, if they ever take buses outside of London, I think it's probably very rare, and therefore have little or no experience of the impact of their neglect and obsession with privatisation, which has battered our buses over more than a decade. We have changed that. Our multi-year funding means that we now have a £3 billion boost to end the plight of bus routes being scrapped at short notice, tightening requirements for cancelling vital bus routes. That £3 billion, however, translates to £42 million in Kent. I would indeed should be celebrating that investment in our county councils' opportunities to be able to improve our bus services. Unfortunately, the decisions by the administration in Kent means that very little of that investment will come to Thanet. Leafy and well-heeled Tunbridge Wells will receive more than £3 million worth of investment in their bus services. Thanet, with some of the most deprived communities, including the poorest pensioners, is receiving a mere £500,000. Now, we may all agree that decisions should be made by government as close as possible to the communities they serve, as my honourable friend who represents Folkestone and Hythe pointed out. But this allocation is grossly unfair in the way that Kent County Council has gone about it, and suggests that they are not interested in investing where bus services can significantly benefit the community. Thanet is effectively receiving only 2.3% of Kent's bus subsidy funding. The Better Buses Act gives Kent County Council the power to restore vital bus services like the number 9. Now, I say the number 9 in the same way that my honourable friend for Folkestone and Hythe pointed out a number of bus numbers across his constituency. Bus numbers matter to communities because they are the difference between being able to get out and about or being locked at home. They need to be regular, they need to be reliable, they do need to be affordable, they need to be safe, and they need to be clean. Now, I know when I conducted my bus survey, we received a number of representations, and one of them specifically was the number 9, and I put it in this context of asking for free public transport and bus travel for all of the over 60s. There would be no point in having free bus travel for many of my constituents in East Thanet if they were trying to get to a hospital appointment in Canterbury, because there is no bus to get there. They cannot shop in Canterbury, whether the bus is free or not, because there is not a bus to take them there. We need to be clear that when we are developing a bus transport service, a bus service for our communities, we are developing it to make sure that we have reliable routes as well as affordable fares. I have received representations, for example, to support the Select Committee's recommendations, the Transport Select Committee's recommendations for under 22's free bus travel. It is a representation that I am extremely sympathetic to, Mr Mundell, because it is so important that we have young people who simply cannot get to work when they're on apprenticeship wages, or they cannot get to their colleges because they do not have significant and sustained income, and yet they're then being penalised when they're trying to do the right thing.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will indeed give way.
My honourable friend is making a powerful case, as per usual. Just before Christmas, I held a bus roundtable, an inclusive bus roundtable, to which I invited Bournemouth Gateway Club, but also the Cambion Wing College. And the Cambion Wing College calculates that it costs around £300 a year for their students to reach their college, because they open at a time which is outside of the operating time of the concession pass. Now, that clearly is bizarre, but it's particularly bizarre because the Cambion Wing supports people who have got special educational needs, and we as a government are trying to provide more workplace opportunities for people with special educational needs and with wider needs too. Would she agree with me that actually, as a major part of our work and welfare programme, having a reliable bus route but also an affordable bus is absolutely critical?
I couldn't agree more with my honourable friend. Particularly, one of the things that I find quite frustrating when I'm talking about increasing the opportunities for young people in my constituency is people quite often say what young people need is more aspiration. And what I remind them is, frankly, what they need is a bus service that gets them to where they will be able to fulfil their aspirations that they already experience. The allocation that we have here in Thanet is not going to be able to meet the needs and ambitions of our community, and that is deeply depressing. It is important, however, that I need to put on the record with our survey that we did in East Thanet that the biggest and strongest message that we got back about people's experience of the bus service that we have in Thanet is the friendliness and helpfulness of our bus drivers. I don't think that should be underestimated when we talk about the experience of going on the bus. There's no point if it's not there, and there's no point if it's grumpy. Our coastal communities in particular lack connectivity. Buses are essential. It is a way that we move away from a reliance on the car. Free bus travel, however, is of little value if there are no buses. Concessionary travel for disabled people, as my honourable friend who represents Bournemouth also points out, and for young people, are strong contenders for investment. So finally, my question would be to the Minister, when will the Department for Transport acknowledge that bus journeys are as good an indicator of economic activity as car movements?
And I call Dr Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under you today. And I do thank the member for Folkestone and Hythe for the way in which he introduced the debate. I think the contribution from the member for Folkestone and Hythe and also the member for East Thanet reminded me I should be grateful that Edinburgh does benefit from a publicly owned bus service and a publicly owned tram service. Both are award-winning nationally, competing against commercial competitors. And I have to say, in Edinburgh, the bus service is run essentially without subsidy. And in fact, often it returns a dividend to its owner, the people of Edinburgh, to be spent in Edinburgh. As bus drivers are amongst the best paid in the country. And I'm sure Mr Mundell have experience of Lothian buses, and he won't disagree with me when I say that the worst Lothian bus is better than the best London bus, by far. And I know he's smiling, so I'll take that as agreement. But I do want to use this debate to talk about something other than Lothian buses you might be glad to hear. And I do want to use it to pay tribute to my Scottish Labour colleague Sarah Boyack, MSP, who is set to retire this year. And I do use the word retire gently, because I think it's not a word she particularly enjoys hearing. As the Chair will remember, she served in Donald Dure's cabinet. When she took up her position as Scotland's first Transport Minister, Scotland had a hodgepodge of concessionary travel delivered by local authorities right across the country. Sarah changed that when she was Scotland's in her role by taking steps to establish national minimum standards of service for all OAPs, that's what they were called back then, older people, old age pensioners, and disabled people. This was free travel outside morning peak to start with, but it was soon expanded to free 24/7 travel, and more recently to include all people under 22. I don't know what Sarah would say our greatest achievement in politics would be, but I feel that free bus travel for older people, disabled people, and now younger people must have the greatest impact of all the decisions that she made. And this is not just about saving money. As we've heard already, it's about ensuring people can keep in touch with friends and family, thereby helping tackle social isolation that many older people and disabled people face. And the interesting thing is, when she started on this journey, there was different thresholds for accessing the free service, because retirement ages were different back then. But over time, they've aligned to over 60 to access free travel. And of course, my head tells me that it doesn't really make sense to provide free bus travel to people who are over 60, who are travelling to well-paid jobs inside Edinburgh. But when you meet people who are in that age range, and I have to say I'm only 1,254 days to being eligible for my free bus pass in Scotland, many see them, when they get that pass, as it being a reward from the country for the contribution they've made to their community or to wider society. And it's something that people hold dearly. And I do think it would be brave of any Scottish Government to suggest that that should be removed. So I do hope that people across all parties will listen to the experience in Scotland. And I do hope the Chair will join me in wishing Sarah well as she approaches her non-retirement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and indeed I do join him in wishing Sarah Boyack well. She's made a huge contribution to the Scottish Parliament in the 26 years that she has served there in different capacities. I now call Tom Gordon on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for opening the debate earlier on and putting some of the key points across so well. I'd like to start as well by thanking the 226 people in my constituency of Harrogate and Knaresborough who added their name to this petition. Free bus travel, as we've heard, is already available to people 60 and over in London, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. The provision also exists in some local authorities where they've chosen to finance it, such as Merseyside. Across the rest of England, you can get an older person's bus pass, which gives access to free bus travel when you reach the state pension age. But obviously this is set to increase and go up in due course. What we've seen over the last decade, and certainly under the last government, was a stark decline in the number of bus journeys taken, with 1 billion fewer passenger journeys in 2023 than in 2025. We've seen the chronic underfunding of bus services. What we do know is that everyone should have the convenient, affordable options to get around, whether it be to get to work, to get to the shops, to go to school or to go to hospital, visit friends or families, or access other vital services. And this is particularly important to those who are 60 and over, who face greater odds of social isolation and are might have less access to private vehicles or active travel options. One of the things that particularly concerns me when I speak to people in my area, but also across Yorkshire as a whole, is the way in which we've seen other services which might have offered a replacement or an alternative to this provision. Councillor Andrew Hollier in York was talking to me about how the City of York Council have failed to replace the Darlham Ride community transport service that many people who were 60 and over would have been able to use in the 2 years since it folded. So I would recognise that this petition is trying to make sure there is a great provision for people there who might have that inequality of access. It's really important that we have frequent and affordable buses. It's important for quality of life, and it's particularly of concern in rural areas where those transport options are limited. Sadly, far too many parts of our country don't have a decent bus service, and under the last Conservative government, bus services withered, isolating pensioners and breaking up friends and families. Many rural communities have been left effectively cut off from the public transport they need too. And fares between 2015 and 2023 have increased massively by an average 59%. Liberal Democrats are campaigning to restore and expand bus services and better integrate bus services with other forms of public transport. So we welcome funding and new powers which were introduced in the Buses Act, but we do want the government to go further. The Honourable Member for Dewsbury and Batley earlier mentioned about the fact that you end up with what is, many describe as a postcode lottery, where different local authorities have different offers. And that's what's really key from this. Just last month before Christmas, I held a drop-in with WizKids, and we had the Labour Mayor for Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, there, and he was talking about the 2 successful trials that they had at removing some restrictions on certain types of bus passes, including for older persons and for disabled people. He's now looking to make those changes permanent. And one of the things that he did cite was the fact that whilst that's a great local decision that can be taken by him because of the powers and funding that he's got, there does need to be a national funding fix for it. And that's what we heard from people from Bus Users UK and from WizKids too, is that where you have these powers, if you don't have the funding to go with it, then it's not really a choice. And that's something that obviously I've mentioned to the Minister extensively in a number of debates and at questions too, and I'm sure you won't be surprised to hear me making that point again here today. I will give way.
My honourable friend for giving way, and I also want to thank the 207 people from my constituency who signed this e-petition. In BCP, Liberal Democrats run the council, and next year they'll receive 3.7 million, the following year 4 million, the year following 5.3 million, the year following that 6.3 million by 2030, and they also get the benefit of long-term funding certainty. Would he welcome that working together with a Labour government with that Liberal Democrat-led council so that that council can get on with making the funding allocations that will allow people to have the routes and the fares that they're entitled to, particularly given that the Liberal Democrats do tend to enjoy their time in Bournemouth whenever they hold a conference?
I thank the Honourable Member for that intervention. I think this is one of those things that, for me, you know, the party politics can be left at the door on this one. It's about making sure that we have better bus routes and better access across the board. And where people can get around the table and work collaboratively, I absolutely want to see that. And I know I've worked with a number of colleagues, including the member for York Central here, when we've been talking about access for disabled bus passers as well. You know, I don't think anyone on this needs to be overtly partisan and tribal. It's definitely something that, you know, it's about making sure there's improvements there to give people that option and that lifeline that often public transport is. And I think, just touching on that point, we had an intervention earlier from the Honourable Member for East Thanet, and she was putting up her constituency and talking about leafy Tunbridge Wells. I know the Honourable Member for Tunbridge Wells well. His constituency is rural, and I know obviously she's got, the member for East Thanet's got challenges in her constituency, but trying to divide and conquer and pit people against each other, for me, is really not what this is about. I think we want to see good bus services everywhere. We don't want anyone to be losing out. We want to raise the bar across the board for everyone. Obviously, we saw the buses bill gain royal assent last year. We, as a party, the Liberal Democrats, supported many positive measures in the bill, such as empowering local authorities to operate their services and provisions to implement services for socially necessary local routes. But we do want to see the government go further to fully address the needs of rural areas, tackle lack of provision and assist local authorities in transition to net zero buses. We believe that bus services should remain affordable and will continue campaigning for restoration of a £2 bus fare cap, which is vital to passengers who are struggling to meet the cost of living and are struggling to deal with affected bus route cuts under the Conservatives. One of the things that I also did last year was I went on a visit with the APPG for Diabetes, and I ended up speaking to some clinicians who were talking about restrictions on bus passes or a lack of free available travel actually sees people missing appointments, not turning up on time, or quite often just not showing. And one of the things that really frustrates me about this is we know that when we look at some of those cost restrictions, if we were to expand concessionary travel to over 60s or people with disabilities, then it might actually have a greater saving on other parts of the government and other services too. If you think about the cost of a missed hospital appointment, you know, when you're talking about a bus fare, that pales in comparison. We need to be thinking about a bigger joined-up approach when it comes to funding buses to then fund vital services down the line with savings. So one of the things that I'd like to ask the Minister is what economic assessments has he and the department made when it comes to the ENCTS and how extending it might actually save other government departments and other services money? And if that's not something that's already happened, is it something that he will look into and give us assurances on? In summary, I fully support the aspiration to see free bus travel for people over 60. I think a member earlier mentioned it would cost £250 million, which obviously is not exactly affordable in this current climate by the sounds of it. But I do think it's the direction of travel that we should be heading in. And just on that, something that is less costs less and is definitely more affordable would be to start looking at how you could expand the disabled bus passes, which at an average of only £75,000 per year per transport per TCA, would be a lot more affordable than over 60s. So that might be something the Minister would want to make a comment about as well. Thank you.
I call Shadow Minister Jerome Mayhew.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell, and Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all other honourable members. And I particularly want to thank the Honourable Member for Romney High, for Folkestone Hythe and Romney Marsh, I hope I've got that right, and through him to Mrs Karen Hickman, who created the petition that we have been debating this afternoon. Now, that petition comes from a sentiment that we can all agree with, that we want bus services which serve the passengers well and as cheaply as possible. And everyone who uses buses wants affordable journeys. This debate provides us with an opportunity to explore how essential buses are to our constituents and, in particular, the role they play for older people. Maintaining and improving the existing concessionary scheme, which offers free bus passes in England to those of state pension age and disabled people, is a critical responsibility for the government. But fundamental to its success is that it remains financially sustainable in serving those who have reached state pension age. We know how valuable the bus pass is to those who've reached pensionable age, affording the opportunity for older people to take journeys and leave their homes. We must make sure that we do not jeopardise this scheme by expanding it beyond the bounds of the Treasurer's willingness to pay for it. The importance of the scheme is apparent when we look at the experiences of older people. Age UK data suggests that more than 2 million people in England over the age of 75 live alone, and more than 1 million older people have said that they go over a month without speaking to a friend, neighbour, or family member. That's quite a sobering statistic. So, considering such statistics, the case for bus passes for older people does become self-evident, providing an incentive for older age pensioners to travel from their homes and into the community clearly has extraordinary merit. But then we come to funding by the public. So the starting point for the provision of any service is that those who benefit from the service should be the ones who pay for it. A free bus pass, after all, Mr. Mundell, isn't free. It's just paid for by someone else, in this case, other taxpayers. So we need to be sure that this is a sound reason for increasing taxes, which is the inevitable consequence of increasing public support. Now, we all know of schemes within our constituencies that seek to bring people together. In my constituency of Broughton and Fakenham, ACT, which stands for the Elsham and District Care Trust, runs a network of minibuses that brings in older people to the central hub to connect older people to the community. The free bus pass for pensioners continues this approach and sends a clear message that being older shouldn't be a barrier to remaining a valuable part of the community. However, as we also all know, such schemes do not come without cost. The DfT statistics show that basically £1 billion, £995 million in net current expenditure is spent on concessionary travel, with about 800 million of that being reimbursed to the travel concessionary authorities. Now, the government's response to the petition highlighted the importance of cost and said that any changes to the statutory obligations, particularly on lowering the age of eligibility, would need to be carefully considered for its impact on the scheme's financial sustainability overall. And as I see it, the challenge of extending the scheme to over 60-year-olds isn't just a matter of cost, but should also consider the impact on wider usage of bus services. The profiles of over 60s and those who've reached state pension age are very different. Look at rates of employment. The employment rates for the between 60 and 64 is 58%. Now that drops to just 12.8% for those aged 65 and over. And in addition, for those who have decided to retire early, the majority have taken that decision because they are in sufficiently comfortable financial position to be able to do so. So on the issue of available income, looking across the community as a whole, it is not at all clear that blanket taxpayer support for all those over 60 is an effective use of taxpayers' money. We must ensure that the policy decisions relating to buses create affordable trips for all. It's why the last government's decision on the £2 fare cap was so effective. It set out a price reduction for all bus users, improving affordability for everyone, encouraging take-up of services across society, not just for one part of it. We should also recognise that not all parts of the country are the same, and I agree with the point made by the Honourable Member for Folkestone Hythe and Romney Marsh on this, that where a local authority has identified a particular need in their community, they are the organisation that's best placed to focus on appropriate support, including local bus schemes and not central government. There are numerous Conservative councils across the country which have taken steps to increase bus budgets and use enhanced partnerships to increase ridership. And I look at Norfolk County Council, my own council, which since the pandemic, through its enhanced partnership, has increased ridership by over 40%. And just 2 counties away, Essex has increased its ridership by more than 50%. In passing, it is worth pointing out that that is an increased growth in bus ridership, which surpasses that of Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, despite his much vaunted B network. So a blanket change across the whole of England is completely different from these targeted approaches responding to local need. Extending free bus travel to an additional 4 million people, irrespective of their income and based solely on age, is likely to cost the taxpayers, through increased taxes, hundreds of millions every year. Between 250 million, as suggested by the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, and up to 400 million, which we've heard from another speaker. Ultimately, what the Conservative Party has made clear is that reforms to our bus services need to be realistic. We've got to focus on passengers, and I fear that the result of an expensive scheme could end up increasing costs on passengers more widely. We've already seen that the government encouraging local authorities to jump into franchising, which may put some local authorities at very significant financial risk. And we don't want to see further policies which may undermine financial stability, which would be bad for passengers in the long run, as well as for taxpayers. Now, I recognise there are parts of the UK in which bus passes remain available to those over the age of 60. But if we look at Scotland and Wales, who've had these policies in place, led by the SNP and Labour Party for many years, there remain many of the same challenges on buses that have been present in England, despite 100% subsidies. Between 2010 and 2025, the number of journeys per head decreased in Scotland and Wales by 31% and 41% respectively. These decreases were greater, not less than, the fall in journeys per head in England outside London. What that suggests, Mr Mundell, is that the Conservative policy of a £2 fare cap was in practice a better solution than free bus passes to the over 60s. And it's a great shame that one of the government's first acts was to increase that cost by 50%. Yeah, I will give way.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. He seems to be outlining a situation where he says he disagrees with free transport for over 60s in the devolved nations. Is it his party's position that come these important elections in just a few months' time, that if they were to be elected, which is increasingly unlikely, would they get rid of it?
I'm grateful for the intervention. It brings me on to the next point, which is that government funds are limited. The support provided needs to be focused exclusively on areas where it can do the most good. And the blanket increase in 100% subsidies for a cohort that is mainly in employment does not appear to pass that test. And I fear that by increasing the cost of support for older people more widely, it risks current levels of support for pensioners. And I look forward to the Minister's views in this matter.
Minister Simon Lightwood.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, Mr Mundell, and a Happy New Year to all colleagues. I'm grateful to the Petitions Committee for scheduling today's debate, and for my honourable friend, the member for Folkestone and Hythe, for representing so clearly, I think, the views of the petitioners who want to see free local bus travel extended to everyone aged over 60 in England. Let me begin by reaffirming the government's commitment to the English National Concessionary Travel Scheme. It is a cornerstone of local mobility, supporting independence, tackling isolation and connecting people to essential services. Under the scheme, free off-peak local bus travel is available to those of state pension age and to those with eligible disabilities from 9:30 until 11 o'clock on weekdays and all day weekends and bank holidays. I'm proud that this scheme exists for all residents of England as a statutory entitlement. Out of the 38 member countries of the OECD, the UK is joined only by Ireland, Luxembourg and New Zealand in having a nationally run, completely free bus travel scheme for older and disabled people. Petitioners ask us to lower the age of eligibility for the older person's bus pass to 60. Now, I understand why. For many people in their early 60s, buses are a lifeline to work, caring, volunteering and staying active in their communities. However, eligibility for an older person's bus pass in England is set in legislation to the state pension age, which is currently 66. That linkage reflects changes in longevity and helps to ensure the scheme remains equitable and affordable over time. Any change to national eligibility would therefore need to be considered really carefully. The concessionary travel scheme is a significant national entitlement. Local authority spending on concessionary travel supported by government is around £795 million a year. Changing the national statutory eligibility would carry substantial additional recurring costs. Any such proposal would have to demonstrate clear value for money, alongside other priorities for improving services for passengers. It is important to underline that local communities already have powers to go further than the statutory minimum, excuse me, where this suits local priorities and indeed budgets. They can, for example, lower the age of eligibility locally or extend hours of use. Some areas offer precisely these enhancements. For example, as the member for Folkestone and Hythe noted in his speech, the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, individuals aged 60 and over are eligible for free travel on all local buses under Mersey Travel over 60s travel pass. These additional discretionary concessions are designed and funded locally, allowing communities to tailor support, whether that is earlier eligibility, companion passes, wider modes or earlier start times, while the national statutory requirements of the concessionary travel scheme remain in place. Well, indeed.
I thank the Minister for giving way and apologise to the House for not being able to be here earlier because of the urgent question. I've spoken with the Minister previously around the concessionary travel scheme. He's talking about the ability of local authorities to institute pick and mix type approaches to this. But does he not recognise that that postcode lottery approach to concessionary bus travel is a real problem? We need a consistent approach across the country, and particularly wider eligibility for disabled people to use their bus passes at all times of day. And does he recognise the need for young people to have concessionary free bus travel? Because they cannot drive. They need to get around too.
Minister. It comes back to affordability again, and the whole scheme needs to be couched in an affordable way. I'll come on to a few of the other points in my response. So alongside safeguarding the sustainability of the concessionary travel scheme, our focus is on delivering better buses for everyone. And at the end of last year, we confirmed long-term investment of over £3 billion over the next 3 years to support local leaders and bus operators across the country to improve local bus services for millions of passengers over the remainder of the spending period. This includes multi-year allocations for local authorities under the Local Authority Bus Grant, totalling nearly £700 million per year, ending the short-term approach to bus funding and giving councils the certainty that they need to plan ahead and improve services for local communities. And I think that the member for Torbay talked about the sustainable funding model. I think that addresses this. I feel it also addresses the affordability questions raised by the honourable member for Bedford and the member for Harrogate and Knaresborough, that funding must come with the powers. I believe, again, the funding has followed the powers of the Bus Services Act there. Now, this funding... I will indeed.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. Would he look again, though, at the settlement he's given York and North Yorkshire's mayor? Because it is going to mean that there's less choices available to the mayor because of the reduction in the settlement that he has received. But also, he would like to use perhaps some of his other transport budgets to be able to subsidise that so he can make positive choices for buses and bus users right across York and North Yorkshire.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention. I continue to work closely with the Mayor of York and North Yorkshire. I know they're one of our pilot areas when it comes to franchising, and I'll go on in a little bit later on in my speech about the formula, the fairer formula, which has dictated the amounts that have been received in areas across the country. So this funding is in addition to the £1 billion we are already providing in this financial year to support and improve local bus services and keep fares affordable. This funding enables councils and operators to protect local routes, improve reliability, upgrade stops and enhance accessibility and, where they judge it right, to support local discretionary concessions. These measures should help to make bus travel more accessible and affordable for all, including the over 60s. The member for Folkestone and Hythe asked specifically about supporting improvements to rural bus services. We know that bus services in rural areas can be a lifeline for many, providing the only means of getting around. That's why in our multi-year funding allocations for local authorities, we've revised the formula to include a rurality element for the first time, ensuring that those additional challenges of running services in rural areas are taken into account. My honourable friend also asked about measures to ensure that local authorities use their bus funding to truly improve services for passengers. And I can assure him that this funding will be linked to an outcomes framework which tracks the impact of funding against a suite of indicators aligned with the issues that matter most to passengers. Crucially, this framework will help us to identify where local transport authorities may need additional support to deliver the improvements their communities expect. We know that the debate around access to free bus travel is rooted in concerns about affordability and quality of local bus services, and we're taking steps to address this too. The government introduced the £3 single bus fare cap at the beginning of last year, and at the spending review announced that this would be extended until March 2027. The cap is helping millions of passengers save on their regular travel costs, and without it, single fares could soar above £10 on some services on the most expensive routes. The member for Folkestone and Hythe asks what further steps the government is taking to lower the cost of bus travel. Local leaders can use the funding the government is providing to improve bus services to introduce their own local fare measures below £3 if they wish to do so. This is already the case in places like Greater Manchester and the North East. The member for Harrogate and Knaresborough also raised the challenge of extending travel times for disabled persons' bus passes as well. And the government is committed to improving public transport. I know we've had this debate often. We want to improve public transport so it is more inclusive and enables disabled people to travel safely, confidently and with dignity. 76% actually of local concession authorities currently offers some form of extension to the 9:30 start time for disabled bus pass use, and this could include full or partial extensions or discounted travel before 9:30. Now, I'm going to make progress. I've got quite a lot to cover, and I want to make sure I reply to all members and give them the courtesy of that. We believe this government's reforms to bus services more widely will also help to improve access to local bus services. Our Bus Services Act 2025 starts to do just that by giving local leaders the powers that they need to deliver better bus services for passengers and empowering them to choose the model that works best in their area, whether that be franchising, strengthened enhanced partnerships or setting up local authority bus companies. The honourable member for East Thanet said that bus numbers matter. I quite agree, which is why I'm really pleased that in the year ending March 2025, there were 1 billion bus miles travelled. That is up 2% already. She raised concerns about her reform-led council and making sure that they invest that money fairly across their whole geography. Now, the BSIP guidance is clear on this, that improvements must deliver across the whole local transport authority. The member for Folkestone and Hythe highlighted the accessibility of bus services in his speech, and our Bus Services Act also takes steps to address this. This includes a new requirement for local authorities to develop a bus network accessibility plan, reviewing the current accessibility of the networks and how they will improve them in future. The Act represents the next phase in the government's ambitious bus reform agenda aimed at reversing the decline in bus services, improving the passenger experience and increasing bus usage nationwide. My honourable friend also highlighted economic growth and unemployment in this speech. Bus services, as part of a modern and effective transport network, have a vital role to play in delivering this government's mission to kickstart economic growth. And we believe improved services will help contribute to lower unemployment by better facilitating access to jobs and education. In closing, I'd like to make clear that this government recognises the strength of feeling expressed through this petition and the value of concessionary travel to those who use it. We remain committed to the scheme and ensuring it is sustainable for the long term. We'll continue to empower local leaders to go further where it is right for their areas, and we will keep working with authorities and operators to enable them to deliver better, more reliable and accessible bus services across the country. I would like to once again thank the member for Folkestone and Hythe for bringing the petitioners' views to the House today, and all members who have spoken today for their contributions on this really important subject. I look forward to continued engagement with members as we implement reforms and support local decision-making to the ultimate benefit of passengers. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Tory, go on to wind the debate up.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. It seems to me that everyone agrees about the importance of buses generally and the importance that they have for local communities. I was glad to hear from the Minister that a rurality element in funding was added in the way that the bus funding has been allocated, because in areas like Nottingham, Folkestone and Hythe, we've seen route after route after route being cut because we're being told there aren't enough people using them, they're too expensive to drive all the way out to the rural and remote villages, many of which we have in my constituency. So that is a really important factor. But also hospital appointments, GP services. We've heard a colleague from Bournemouth, York, a number of colleagues talk about the importance of being able to get to a GP appointment, a hospital appointment. But it seems that the issue, the point of difference is really about whether this is a good use of money and whether it would be affordable. The Conservative spokesman talked about the proposal wouldn't be targeted at those who need it, and he'd made arguments about the relative increase in passenger numbers in Wales and Scotland versus England due to free over 60 travel versus the £2 cap. But really, I think this comes down to the question of, do you think that the bus services should be run by local people, taking into account local people's needs, or do you think it should be a top-down government edict as to how every single bus service, a local authority in the country should run their system? And I think the right answer, in my view, and it's the view of the government, and I think it is the right approach, which is that it needs to be down to the local authority to decide how they spend that money. But it does mean, though, that you have to have accountability. And so I was again encouraged to hear from the Minister that there is going to be an outcomes framework to track the use of this funding and to identify additional support where that's not being followed. I would add, and I would invite the Minister to look not just about support, but ways of actually ensuring that this money is spent in the right way, if necessary, by a slightly tougher approach. Because what I'm worried about is when I hear my colleague, my honourable friend, the member for East Thanet, talk about essentially being pushed down the list when it comes to the amount of money her constituency is getting, a very, very socially deprived area, versus somewhere like Tunbridge Wells, where there is not such deprivation. One wonders why she's getting so much less than areas which, frankly, there's probably much higher use of car ownership, etc. And so accountability for how this money is being used, as I said in my speech, substantial amounts of money being given now, so there can't be suggested that the government hasn't properly funded this. It's down to the local authorities to spend this money in the right way, and I will continue to do my job to hold Reform Kent County Council to account for the way it is delivering this service. Thank you, Mr Mundell.
The question is that this House has considered e-petition 702845 relating to free bus travel for people over 60. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. This sitting is suspended until 6 p.m.